2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Yes? One more time.
Is it okay to reuse figures with citations, or should we always have our own images?
Okay, that's a very, very good question. Can you take a figure from somebody else and reuse it, sort of? No, you cannot, unless you send an email asking, can I use your figure? And if you get a yes, then you can do it. But otherwise you cannot. You need to sort of create their own. However, there are free pictures. So if you look at free pictures in databases that are for free, then you can use it. But usually, when you get to those, the person who created the figure from the beginning usually say, I want you to tell that I was the original person who drew it or did it or created it. So depending on where you find them, it depends if you can use it. If it says they are for free, of course you can use them. But if they don't do it, don't use it, because you can really be in trouble. Okay? So try to reuse it. But it's a very, very good question. Anything else about figures, tables, diagrams? I can tell you one more thing about diagrams. When you have diagrams in three dimensions, it's very nice, wonderful to do, easy to use, but think about when things come behind each other. Because in a text, you only have, 2 dimensions. So if you have a 3-dimension diagram, if you are posting it like this, you don't see the ones that are behind. If so, you need to show it like this, or this, or this. So think about it. You can actually hide information behind the other numbers if you have that kind of diagram. So think about it. So just use 2 dimensions, even though 3 dimensions are very nice. And another thing you should think about when it comes to figures, unless you show something, don't use it. Meaning only use a figure when you really want to emphasize something. If you don't emphasize anything, the figure won't give you any extra. Okay? Anything else about figures? Because I'm not going to discuss that anymore, otherwise. Okay. So, I won't say any more about the topography or the format. I hope you got an understanding why it's important. So, instead we were going to talk about introduction and conclusions. When you write a thesis, the tricky part is the introduction. You have to write it early, but it is really hard to get it right. And that's something that requires to be written many times. You need to start in the beginning so you know what you're going to do, but you have to rewrite it so it becomes understandable. And another thing that is really hard when it comes to thesis is it's scientific writing. What does scientific writing mean? What does scientific writing mean to you? What is it? Is scientific writing about research? Is that scientific writing? You are required to do scientific writing. How do you get your thesis to become scientific? Well, what you actually do is, 1, you look at others, what they have done, and use that in your theory. Always always based what you are going to do from the literature. Make sure that somebody else have done something, and if you can't find anything, which is probably not the case, but if you can not find anything, you need to tell that. Although a lot of study been done, it's not possible to find anything in this area. It has to be written. But my guess is that most of you are doing something that you already know something about, meaning that somebody else have done something. So you need to find material from other sources. Then you need to argue about it. You need to sort of saying that this author thinks this author thinks that, in this thesis this is used or that is used, and so on. So you argue about the usage, you sort of showing what the author thinks, you sort of evaluate the material you read in your thesis. So that's the scientific part, that you don't just read and say, take this for granted. That's not possible any longer. And I also say it's important that you use many that thinks the same, because if you use somebody who is controversial, you will base your whole work on that, which may lead you out in the ozone. So think about when you read something, make sure that somebody else thinks the same. And make sure that your work is trustworthy. And that's another thing that's scientific. Whatever you have chosen to do, you have to evaluate with somebody, either with a company or through a literature review study or something. The literature review with comparison takes much, much longer than taking somebody who review what you have done. If you are creating a protocol, you have to make tests, show it works. So now we can't just be this innovative people or idea creator. We also need to show it works. Because people who does not show it works cannot say that what they have come up with is valid. And we need to show that. We need to show whatever we do has a significant impact in the society. So that is what it is. And what we then talk about here is critical thinking. Have you heard about that? So we talk about when you are looking at material and you start to write about that, and when you compare different authors, that's a way of being not critic in the sense that you don't like an author and what they say. It's more like, okay, you make it obvious that you have used this author and the material, but you also show it's another side of the coin, always. So you always think twice when you do something. And that's the critical thinking. And that's what you do in your thesis. So the introduction then. What's in an introduction? Well, you have the template, so you know exactly what's in it. But I will give you some ideas of what should be in each and every part of that, so you can really get a good thesis in the beginning for somebody who will read it. There is one thing you should think about when you write. And you can hear more about that if you look at the videos. But What we say is that you write as an hourglass. What does that mean? Well, you have some kind of introduction. You have detailed description, and you have some kind of summary where you summarize what you have been talking about. This you find everywhere. Think about the newspaper or think about an article you read. You always have an introduction. You always have a detailed description. You always come up with a conclusion or a summary. So whatever you write, it should be in this way. It's hard to get it right, because usually we go through to the details first. So I usually say, write the details first and the summary, and then put the first introduction sentence as the last thing you do. You recognize this? How you work or how you read if you read things, you recognize this? So that is what people who write a lot of text says, that this is absolutely the best way of engaging.